I want to talk a little about zoogeography. This is another one of the sciences we can do with anything. Plants, animals, bacteria. But most of my examples are vertebrate examples. Zoogeography. Sometimes called biogeography. Zoogeography, you're just looking at animals. And what this is, it's a fairly broad science that brings into play all sorts of different branches. At its core, it takes distribution of organisms and correlates what you see in the distribution with the evolutionary tree that you generate. So you have the phylogeny, and you overlay it on the distribution of your organisms, and you seek to understand the patterns. It brings together, like I said, lots of different aspects of an organism's biology. And I just made a list here. We focus on the evolutionary history of whatever it is we're looking at. Well, we also bring into play the geographic and geologic history of the region in question. Ecology is different. I mean, if the climate's different a million years ago, then they have different, they affected patterns of distribution. So we have ecological history, but also the current ecology. You've got rainforests here now, you didn't a million years ago. You have different patterns. And also the current geography. You know, where the mountain ranges are, where the oceans are. So it brings together all sorts of things, and the goal is to understand the patterns in an evolutionary context. So what we're searching for, when we bring all this together, we're searching for patterns in time and in space, to boil it down into one phrase. So we have time and space, and we add phylogenetics to the mix. We add the evolutionary patterns. Here's the distribution of these organisms as they occur today. Not sure what these are. We'll just pull this offline. And this is a hypothesized set of evolutionary relationships. And when you overlay these, you can form hypotheses about any of these different things. It's bringing together all sorts of aspects of biology, geology, and geography into one type of study. And how do you do it? Well, a few steps, very basically. One is, first you have to know what you're talking about. You have to be able to identify your organisms. You're going to try the jacket again. And you have to know where they live and where they don't live. And certainly, this is a native North American gar, and we understand native North American fish distributions pretty well. So, the questions we're puzzled at here, and biogeography, we get that. Okay, here they are. Why aren't they, and the map doesn't go this far, but why aren't they over here in the Colorado River drainage? Why aren't they up here in Hudson Bay drainage? Okay? That's a pattern. We now seek to understand what we're seeing. So the fauna. And this is a key science. I worked with African fishes. These didn't photograph very well, did that? And make better pictures of these. I worked with African fishes, and as I got specimens out of the collection and identified them, I was the first person for the groups of fish I work with ever put the spots on the map. So we can understand the distribution of these things. This thing's found everywhere. There's a green spot there. This one's found just right down here. This one's found down here. This one's only found in these spots up here. Now, you first have to get the basic biology. You have to know your pieces. Maybe that would have been step one. And where you find them and where you don't. Once we have those basic patterns of distributions, you start looking for patterns. Where they're here, but they're not here. Here's some words that get at patterns. Words and conditions and thoughts. Range. Range is the simplest one. Range is where it lives. Everywhere you put a spot on the map, draw a circle around it, that's the range. You call it the geographic range or just the range. And ranges can be different. Migratory things have winter range and summer range. Some things have specific breeding areas they go to. So we can break range down into different categories, but this would be outside that creature's range. Whatever this is, I don't know what it is. Endemic means restricted in distribution to one place. Its range is only found in one place. So there's our Santa Cruz Island scrub jay again. It is endemic to Santa Cruz Island, not found anywhere else in the world. There's a number of plants and some vertebrates that are endemic to each of these islands. Allopatric and sympatric. Okay? Patros, the Greek word there means country, so you can translate that to range. Allo means different. Sim, we translate as shared. Okay? So here's two North American mammals, one of our field mice and ferret. Not ferret, that's the word I'm, well, a little carnivore. But here's his range, and here's his range. These two creatures are allopatric to one another. Unless people move them, they never see each other. Their ranges are separate, allopatric. There's one little population here of this thing, if I remember it, and that's one little area of sympatry. One tiny place where they're sympatric to one another. Now, a better example of that maybe would be this map here. Here's two things that are allopatric in this area, allopatric in this area, but sympatric here. So sympatric means when two things are in the same place. So two different species of plant on Santa Rosa Island are sympatric to one another. Oh, there's another one. My next slide for, yeah, do that like that. Another condition for distributions is very few things are this, but cosmopolitan means found just about everywhere. So, you know, within reason, within the proper habitat, you can find some of these creatures almost anywhere. So, for example, mallard ducks in the northern hemisphere are cosmopolitan. They're just about everywhere the habitat's right, at least in the northern hemisphere. Sperm whales, likewise. Anywhere, you're going to find them in the middle of Arizona, but pretty much worldwide. So these are cosmology used for things that are very broad distributions, and most things are not like that. Some things are cosmopolitan because humans have moved them around, like the two species of rats we put almost everywhere on the planet, the European house mouse and house finches. And there are a number of creatures like that. But I think that little house mouse, almost anywhere there's people on the planet, house mice have ended up. And I haven't, I don't think, I have to ask, I'll have to look at the list. Usually we get house mice, it's a European species, little gray mice. You've seen it, if you had a mouse in your house, it's almost always a little gray mouse. Wherever there's humans, you get these little house mice. They're human commensals, you know, since the Middle Ages. As you get out into natural habitats, they almost always get replaced by whatever native mouse lives in that area. So, for example, I caught a mouse in my apartment. I live up here in the Glen, and I caught a mouse, and it was not a house mouse, it was the native mouse. And I don't think in the owls, which would have collected mice whenever they found, I don't think we have house mice on campus, which is a little unusual. There's enough human habitation here, we probably should have them. Anyway, we're off topic. But I've done that study where you have a barn. It's been in Colorado, we did the trapping line. In the barn, the immediate farm area, the pastures, right next to the barn, was house mice. And we set a line of traps out. And you get about 15 meters away from the barn, you start to get in the pasture and the grassland habitat, and fewer house mice, and more field mice. And eventually no house mice, all field mice. And in the barn, no field mice, all house mice. Off topic. Now, barriers are something biogeographers worry about. Barriers are features of the environment or the biology of a creature that prevent it from accessing a new habitat. So, a creature that lives here may not have access to that habitat. So there's a reason, whatever this is, let's say a salamander is on the mainland, but all of a sudden there's a barrier there. Barriers to movement. Barriers to movement are what help establish the patterns. And barriers come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. I think some of them are pretty obvious. The classic one is the Grand Canyon. Wasn't always there, but it's there now. And we've got unique creatures on the north rim of the Grand Canyon and on the south rim. And that's a barrier to their movement. You have them on one side but not the other. Sometimes valleys can be a barrier. If you're a plant or an animal that lives at high elevation and you're adapted to this environment, that is habitat you can't migrate through. And so, you know, you may be stuck here. Valley might be just like an ocean is to you. You can't move through that. Some can be more subtle. In some habitats, there are no open spaces unless humans make them. And so creatures that evolved in like this Amazonian rainforest don't often see, if ever, open habitat. And that's like the end of the world to them. And they've done studies that this road cut here that may be only 30, 40 meters wide, there are species of birds that might come to the end of that, and they never come above the trees. It's not in their biology. And they never, in their whole evolutionary history, have seen open space. So they come to that, it's like the end of the world to them. And they turn around and go back. That's an artificial barrier that we've created. A wide river might be a natural barrier. And, obviously oceans for all sorts of creatures are barriers. If you're an aquatic creature and you live in a spring in the middle of a desert, that's kind of the opposite of an ocean. This is impenetrable to anything that's adapted to that. So that becomes a barrier to dispersion. Sometimes things can be more subtle, like that example with the road in the forest. Some things adapted to one type of habitat, and it comes up against another habitat, they just don't go in there. And the creatures that are adapted to this kind of habitat won't come out here. And if this is expansive and long, maybe a long row of this, we can get a barrier, and the things in here will not cross it. Even though there might be similar habitat a couple miles over here, this is impenetrable to them. So I get my point here is what's a barrier to a human, and what we can see might not be a barrier to a bird or an insect or a salamander. We have to take that into account. And here's an example of local one, although I don't see these much anymore. When I first moved here, I used to see red-winged blackbirds all over the place. Not all over the place, because they have very specific habitat requirements. If you're out and about and you see a red-winged blackbird, that tells you something immediately. You are near a wetland. These guys never go far from water. So you're near a stream, you're near a swamp or a marsh of some sort. And I assume around here in the agricultural fields there was places where water pooled and you'd have nesting red-winged blackbirds. I haven't seen one in years. But you see them fairly regularly. That's not a good sign, is it? So dry habitat is a barrier to them, potentially. Often climate conspires to give us these barriers, climate and habitat type. Habitat type is determined by climate. And there's this concept called the life zone climate. This is North America. These different patterns here are different types of habitat. Forest or desert or grassland, and different types of forest. And where we get one in one place and another in another place is determined by things like climate and elevation and distance from an ocean. And if you are an organism that only lives in this kind of habitat, well, we're not going to find you down there. And patterns can be as simple as that. That's kind of modern. Sometimes we have to bring history into play. And sometimes we have to bring deep history into play. And our planet's been moving around, the continent's been moving around forever. And so if we're looking at deep patterns, not one type of bird versus a very similar type of bird, but we're looking at one type of dinosaur versus some other type of dinosaur. At one point in time, they might have shared a habitat. But a few million years later, they don't. And so often we see patterns that reflect this kind of deep history. Sometimes it's just, there's trees here, there's grass here. Sometimes it's much deeper than that. And all these factors come into play when you're doing a distributional study. There you go. So these are fossils. These are very ancient tetrapods. And these are places where these fossils are found. And you can see, look at the land masses here: Antarctica, Africa, India, South America. These are places on the planet that are widely separated now, but we get very similar fossils across some of them, giving us a clue into ancient patterns. One example here is a North American fish family. This is the sucker family, Catostomida. I keep hoping we'll get suckers down that stream there, and we never have, but there's a native one in the region. But it's primarily a North American family, quite diverse in North America. And then there's two species in China. It's actually this pretty. You see them in aquarium shops occasionally. In the Yangtze in North America. This is a freshwater fish. It's not like it's swimming through the ocean to disperse itself. That's really interesting. But that tells us at some point these must have been together for a freshwater fish to be split between those two habitats. There's a couple freshwater fishes that we have in North America, and we have a related type in the Yangtze. Well, we used to. The Chinese are wrecking the Yangtze pretty thoroughly. Well, we wrecked the Mississippi, so I guess they shouldn't say it that way. So sometimes we look at, it can be as simple as looking at ecology, ecological biogeography. This kind of stuff is, we call this historical. We're looking at the deep history patterns. Sometimes we see patterns based on more modern things, on the ecology, and more often than not, it's a mix. Here, it's like that life zone concept. You get this particular creature here because the ecology is right for it here. You don't get it here because the ecology is not right for it here. We don't get, well, let me give you my example. These are fishes I worked with. Black and white photographs, they all look like the same, but these are all different species. And these are where I've been able to find them, the distributions of these species. This is Central Africa, in case you haven't figured it out. And what do we got there? We've got 9 species there. 5 of them are mine. So here's the widespread one, called Microtina nana. And it's found throughout Central Africa. Actually, I now think it's probably 2 different species, but there it is right there. We have one that lives on the coast, in these coastal drainages, and we have one that lives in the Congo drainage. That's very similar habitat, but it's separated by a mountain range. So they've been probably slowly diverging based on slight differences in these coastal drainages versus these inland drainages. And they have different color patterns. There's not a lot else that's different about them. The color pattern is slightly different. But I think there's 2 species there. But more significant than that is this thing here and the others. Only found one collection of these things. There's up here, and then there's this one, lives here. Look, you notice where I'm going? I'm going around the edge. Different species lives here. Another species lives here. I think there's another one lives down here. I think there's one more. No, there's 2 more. I think one lives here. See one here. Yeah. So here is ecology getting at us, I think. We've got this really widespread thing in Central Africa. This is, and what you don't see in this map is this is rainforested area. You can almost draw a line around these orange spots, and that's the extent of rainforest in Central Africa in modern times. And all these other things live outside the rainforest. They've adapted to different habitat types, but non-forest types. And one of the main differences is you can see the ones that live in the forest, very straight vertical bars. And all the ones that live outside the forest, their bars are bent or modelly or even tiger-striped. I don't know what that means biologically, but that's the trend. So that's ecology. We've got a group of species that live in a non-forest, and probably a pair of species that live inside the forest. So that's not deep plate tectonics moving around. That's more recent history, where the species are adapting to their particular habitat types. Excuse me. Okay. So yeah, within the forest, beautiful straight bars. These are really pretty fish. I can't find a good picture of a live one. They're blue when they're alive. Outside the forest, they're tiger striped. In different ways of being tiger striped. It's a bunch of different species. Okay. So, sometimes it's ecology, but almost always there's some history involved too. And I've got an example of merging the two. Again, with African fishes. This is more of my research. Let's see, I want to. Okay, we'll go through this one, and then it'll be a good place to call it a day after this. We know that fish is the most interesting thing we can look at. These numbered regions on this map here, these are ichthyofaunal. These are fish faunal regions, and each one of these lines is drawn around a region that has a fairly distinctive fish fauna within it. In other words, there's a number of distinctive fishes in this region that aren't found anywhere else, and things in this region aren't found in here. So there's ecology at play here, probably. You know, this. As we get outside the rainforest, we start to get a different fauna. But also there's history at play. There's tectonics, there's river basins shifting around, there's mountain ranges altering patterns. So in the last 300 million years of African history, there's been changes in climate, but also changes in how the river drainages work, as of mountain ranges and volcanoes, and that's structured this. This is the pattern we end up with, based on a mixture, again, rainforest, not rainforest. But also, if a mountain range pops up, suddenly, what may have been once a big river, now it's two separate rivers with a barrier between them. And so I worked with these things. These are more of my African fishes. They're pretty drab even when they're alive. They're a delightful color of gray. But they're very common in Central and West Africa. And there's 2 or 3 species here. I'm leaning towards 3 now. Now, this is a map showing 2 things. The cross-hatching here is rainforest in modern times, okay, last 2,000 years. Go back in African history, and everything was covered with rainforest. These big belts, for example, the West African, Central African rainforest, there's rainforest everywhere. So, no ecological barrier, right? Rainforest fish could have access to all this habitat. Now this is desert and grassland. So, that's the rainforest in again, last 10,000 years. What these red lines are, is these are where fish faunas break. There's a distinctive fish fauna on this side of this red line, and a distinctive one on this side of this red line. And you can see here, in at least one place, the break corresponds with habitat fairly well. But here, we got rainforest here, we got 2 very different fish faunas on either side of that break. So here's an example where ecology doesn't tell the story entirely. We need to look at other things. Excuse me. So, look at this. This is one of those species called Tinapoma petherici. There's its distribution. Again, it corresponds beautifully to the faunal breaks. It's not crossing any of those lines. And here's the other one called Tinapoma kingsley. And again, it corresponds beautifully with the faunal breaks. This fish, Kingsley, it was collected here. The original specimen was collected here, and it was collected by a woman named Mary Kingsley. She was English, 1800s. And she traveled to Africa and explored. A female. It's kind of a neat story. There's a book about her. I haven't read it, but the scientist who described this fish said, our Miss Mary Kingsley went to South Africa and then went to Central Africa, and then very clearly says, and she traveled alone with nothing but her native guides. Now, I'm not sure we need to know that information, but I think it's funny that in 1896 he felt we had to know that. That fish was named for her. So look at that, though. Here's this thing. And now I put the habitat on. This guy primarily lives in non-rainforest habitat, except down here where he's perfectly happy to live in the rainforest. So ecology doesn't tell us the whole story. And again, the question you want to ask is, why is he here and not here? Here's that other one. This is primarily a rainforest species. When it comes to the end of the rainforest, we lose it. Well, we also had a faunal break there. But look at it. It's in the rainforest here in West Africa. But it doesn't get into these rainforest chunks here, at least not anymore. And up here, it's in habitat that's not in rainforest. So the forest-not forest dichotomy doesn't explain the situation. We need to look at other things. And here's what I think happened. Oh, wrong way. Let's go here. What I think is that the grassland, this is a grassland species. This species would have been found up here in times past. This would have been grassland, scrub forest habitat. That's its habitat. All this stuff down here would have been filled with rainforest. And the rainforest species would have been throughout this region. Africa went through a drying phase the last 10,000 years. And so the rainforests have been retreating. And with it, the rainforest fishes would have retreated with the forest for the most part. So we end up with this rainforest disappearing, except little bits along the coast here, dense rainforest here. And as the rainforest disappeared, this rainforest fish disappeared with it. Why is there not complete overlap? Let's go here. He's not in this rainforest anymore. He's in this rainforest. And here's the huge difference between this part of Africa and this part of Africa. Look at the rivers. These are big rivers that flow way up into the grassland. These are really small rivers that flow up into mountains. These rivers have their entire range within rainforest and mountains. These rivers just have a little tiny piece within rainforest. And what I think happened is as that rainforest retreated, these habitats were protected. And the grassland species never had access to them. Here, the grassland species got into the upper reaches of these rivers, and even though there's still rainforest down here, they were able to push them out. And we get this situation. So he's a grassland species, and when he can take it, he'll take rainforest. See out here? Where'd it go? Out here? This little river out here flows off a mountain range here, and I think it's, even though it's in grassland now and has been for quite a while, it's protected. And the grassland species has never had access to that stream. I'll bet if we took a bucket full of them and dumped them in there, it would replace the rainforest species. Not an experiment you should do. He's there, but he hasn't had access to those habitats yet. Even though they're appropriate for him, he hasn't gotten into them. So we're seeing a shift. And in this case, we have to combine ecology with our understanding, in this case, hydrology, mountain ranges, and drainage basins and things like that. Anyway, that's my hypothesis. That was never published, so don't rush off and publish that. I never got around to it. Okay. All right, well, I'm going to go work on I'm going to go see